Do you want to stay more focused on the right goals in your life, or even just figure out what the right goals are for you? Do you want clarity? Do you want better work-life balance? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to Success Through Failure.
Welcome to the Success Through Failure podcast, the show that reveals failure as your path to success. You'll listen to intriguing interviews with some of the most successful people on the planet and learn how their failures became a launchpad for success and how yours can too. Here's your host, former Division I All-American wrestler, former Division I head coach, speaker, and personal coach, Jim Harshaw.
Welcome to another episode of Success Through Failure. This is your host, Jim Harshaw, and I'm not going to get a full episode out this week, unfortunately. I've just been really busy. I was at the National Wrestling Championships in St. Louis over the weekend. Incredible event as always. 18,000 people in the arena, and it was a spectacular National Championship finals last night. Just incredible wrestling, an incredible spectacle in sports. And late night last night, I got back to the hotel at about 1 o'clock after our University of Virginia alumni family and friends get together. And then I got about 2 hours of sleep, 2 hours and 20 minutes of sleep to be exact. And I had to wake up, catch an Uber to the airport, hurry up and get home. My goal was to get us home as quickly as I could, get back to my family as early as possible. So made good time on the flights and didn't have any delays, and so I'm back in Charlottesville. But wanted to record this. I'm actually in my car on my way back to the house. So I wanted to get this out to you really quickly. It is it's really fascinating when you see really, really successful people. I mean, just the extreme success. And what we witnessed at the National Wrestling Championships over the weekend was the Penn State Wrestling team having 5 of the 10 national champions. It ties a record in terms of the number of national champions. They return all of their national champions, and the success they've had is just historic. They've won 6 of the last 7 national champions. And I know a lot of coaches who go to the Penn State Wrestling camp in the summer and are always trying to get around Cael Sanderson, the head coach, and trying to figure out how he does it, And we listened to Gene Auriemma just recently when the women's Connecticut basketball team won over their 100th consecutive game, and people get around coaches like that and they try to figure out the secret, right? They try to figure out what is it that is different or unique about them. And the one thing that you'll always find about people like that is, number one, they work really hard, harder than most of us realize, and harder than most people are willing to work. So that's the pure and simple fact. It's not usually this well, never is it really this crazy secret sauce they have, but it is a work ethic that is just not understood among most people. Now that's number one. But the interesting part is number two, and I'm going to give you 3 examples that I've experienced recently that have shown me why the second part is so powerful and so interesting. The second part is when you see the Penn State wrestlers, they wrestle with this freedom. To them, it doesn't seem to be about winning. It seems to be about competing. And they perform at such a high level that you can tell that they wrestle with a freedom, and they compete with a freedom that is unhindered by the fear of failure and the fear of losing. And because of that, they're able to maximize their potential. Now the ultimate goal is to succeed, is to win the national championship. But when they focus on the process, the results speak for themselves. The results happen, right? So you have to reverse engineer. You start with the end in mind, right? Stephen Covey taught us that through the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Start with the end in mind, and then you work backwards and you develop your process, and then you let go of the end. You let go of that end product, and you focus on the process and the type of person that you're going to become and achieve in during that process. So that's what the Penn State wrestlers do. That's what, when you hear their coaches talking, when you hear Cael Sanderson talk, or Jason Nolf, or Bo Nick, or these elite wrestlers that they have on their team, the David Taylors, and for the wrestling people that are listening, I know there's a lot of you, you know those names. Those are elite wrestlers, elite people in the sport. But you hear them and they talk about the process. They talk about having fun, and they talk about competing at just a high level. And they don't talk about winning. I mean, really, they just talk about the process. And so I'm going to give you two other examples. So that was the first. Here's another one. One of the wrestlers from my alma mater, University of Virginia, his name's George DiCamillo. George DiCamillo, this is his 5th year. He competed 4 years, redshirted 1 year. So this is his 4th and final chance to try to become an All-American and a national champion. Year 1, he makes it 1 round away from being an All-American. So that's called the blood round. There's top 8's All-American. He lost in the match that would have made him an All-American as a freshman. And that is an excruciatingly painful experience. And so George lost in the round of 12. Proud of him this freshman year. Sophomore year, he does the same thing. He gets to the round of 12 and he loses again. He's a hair's breadth away from reaching his dream of becoming an All-American. As junior year, he's going into the 3rd period in that same match. He's actually won 3 matches, and he's in that 4th round, that 4th match, the blood round they call it, where if you win, you become an All-American. And he's winning by 5-1, 6-1 actually with riding time, 6-1 going into the 3rd period last year. And it's in hand. He's got it. And what happens? He loses. The other guy turns the tide, and George loses. And it's just devastating. And this year, things were different. This year, after the semifinals, George was interviewed. So George became an All-American this year, and after the semifinals, he makes it to the national championship finals, where he's either going to be number 1 or number 2 on the big stage, live on ESPN, 18,000 people. And they take George back, and they do his press conference, and they say, George, and one reporter says, George, 365 days ago, you lost, and he recounts this match that he lost. He says, the reporter asked him, how often do you think of that? And he goes, the last time I thought of that, George said, was 365 days ago. He says, I let go of it. He goes, I know that it sounds like I'm just making that up, and I know you think I'm just saying that, but it's the truth. I let go of that failure. He says he talks about how he let go of that loss, and he just focused on the process, and he believes that everything happens for a reason. And so that was the second instance. Number 1 is Penn State and their coaches and their wrestlers and how they talk about how they compete. And George is the second example. And the third one is University of Virginia head tennis coach Brian Boland. He has won 3 of the last 4 national championships in men's tennis. And he's just an absolutely incredible leader of young people. And I've heard him speak many, many times. He's a good friend. And one thing, he was actually brought into the UVA's Darden School of Business, one of the top business schools, master MBA schools, graduate business schools of business in the world, on the planet. And they brought him in to teach with a class. And this is something that he says. He says about his coaching career. He says, this is a quote I'm going to read straight from the article here. It says, Boland shares his own epiphany with the class. He faults himself for, early in his tenure, focusing players too much on winning instead of on the intrinsic rewards of mastering the craft and playing for a greater purpose. He says, quote, I think we would have won 6 or 7 national championships if I had learned this 10 years ago. And I think I would have been a lot happier. So, end quote. So think about that. Mastering the craft, the intrinsic rewards of mastering the craft and playing for a greater purpose. So think about how you can apply this to your life. How can you focus on mastering your craft, the craft that you want to become excellent at? And maybe there's multiple. I mean, parenting, and maybe it's in your profession as well. But how can you master that craft? And think about the joy that you experience when you get into that flow state. I bumped into Kendall Cross. He's an Olympic gold medalist and friend of mine out at the national championships. He recommended to me a book years ago called Flow by, I'm going to butcher the name of the author here, by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I think I'm butchering that last name, but it's a great book, and it talks about getting into that flow state. And we can get into that flow state when we face a challenge that is commensurate with our skills and with our ability. And whenever we challenge ourselves to master our craft, we get into that flow state. We feel happiness. We feel like we're moving towards something greater. And when you find that purpose behind mastering that craft, that's when you find happiness. That's when you find success. So, I've talked about focusing on the process, not the outcome before. I've talked about, John Wooden has talked about that. Warren Buffett, the great investor, he has a process. He doesn't focus on the outcome. He focuses on his process that is going to give him that outcome. Now, that process sometimes gives him bad outcomes, but more often than not, it gives him good outcomes. So he can't focus on the outcome and the emotions of that. You have to focus on the process. So I urge you to find out what that process is in your life today. What is that thing that you can do today, that process that you can follow today, despite or because of your failures yesterday, just like George DiCamillo and his prior failures, just like Brian Boland in the times that the men's tennis team at UVA came so close to the national championship but failed. But now they're the most dominant team in the country. And they don't focus on winning. They focus on the process. And I urge you to find out that process for yourself. So a great lesson that I learned that was reinforced to me from a 22-year-old young man that I listened to in his press conference. Someone I've learned many things from it over the years just talking to him and also being around people like Brian Boland and the national champions and Olympians that I met again and caught up with out at the national championship. So anyway, I hope that is a great message. I hope that helps you out. And until next time, as always, take the time to get clear on your goals and embrace failure as a stepping stone on your path to success.